Chapter 1. The Scrapyard. The vast expanse of the scrapyards on Epsilon 9 stretched out like an ocean of rusted metal and broken dreams, a desolate and harsh place where the wreckage of war and time lay forgotten. Towering heaps of twisted machinery and discarded ships cluttered the horizon, their once pristine surfaces now weathered and scarred by years of exposure to the unforgiving elements of this barren world. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt fuel and ozone, the kind of scent that seemed to cling to everything: the ground, the buildings, the people, the very atmosphere of the planet. It was a scent that had long since lost any trace of its former utility, now just a reminder of the decay and abandonment that surrounded every corner of the scrapyard. Epsilon 9 had been a thriving hub of technological development once, an empire of machines and innovation. Now, it was nothing more than a graveyard. The world had fallen into disarray long ago, consumed by wars and the thirst for power that had once propelled it into greatness, leaving only the remnants of shattered ships, broken droids, and forgotten space stations scattered across the surface. In the shadow of these colossal wrecks, amidst the tangled remnants of civilization, stood Alex Marlowe. He wasn't exactly sure when or how he had ended up on Epsilon 9. One day, he had simply found himself here, a man alone in a world full of ghosts, searching through the scrapyards for the remnants of a life that he had tried to forget. He had been a soldier once, a military engineer, someone who built and maintained the very machines that had fought in the wars that had torn apart so many worlds. But war had broken him, and the pieces of himself that he had tried to rebuild had always felt jagged, as though they could never quite fit together again. He had left behind the battlefield and the military ranks, hoping that Epsilon 9, with its decaying technology and abandoned ships, would offer him a chance to live out the remainder of his life in peace. A simple life. No grand plans, no great ambitions, just a quiet existence spent fixing machines and staying out of the way of those who had long forgotten the consequences of the wars they had fought. The scrapyards had given him just that. Days bled into one another, indistinguishable from the last. He would wake up early, wander through the scrap piles, sift through the rusted husks of ships and droids, pick out anything that could still be of use, and then return to his small workshop where he would spend hours fixing whatever had caught his eye. He wasn't the kind of person who needed a lot of social interaction, and in a place like this, it was easy to avoid people. The city surrounding the scrapyard was a ghost town, populated by those just like him, those who had nowhere else to go and no other place to be. The city had no future, only the remnants of what had once been. There was no reason to expect much from Epsilon 9 beyond the scraps of a forgotten world. And for a while, Alex had been content with that. He could stay hidden here, far from the memory of the wars, away from the bloodshed that had defined his past, and simply exist. But then, one day, everything changed. It had been just another long day in the yard, one of those oppressive, hot afternoons when the sons of Epsilon 9 beat down relentlessly on the broken ships and machinery, turning the metal surfaces into searing, red-hot iron. Alex had been searching through the pile of scrap near the farthest edge of the yard when he spotted something. At first, it was just a glint of light, something shiny among the twisted wreckage. He had seen many things in the scrap yard, from old weapons to damaged machinery, parts of ships from centuries ago, and the occasional stray droid that had been left to die. But this was different. This wasn't just metal. This was something alive, something that shouldn't have been here. He followed the light, stepping carefully over the broken metal and crumpled machinery that littered the ground, his boots crunching against the sand and shards of metal beneath him. The closer he got, the more he realized that it wasn't a part of a ship or a broken droid that had caught his eye. It was a girl. She lay motionless beneath a pile of wrecked parts, her small frame half buried in the debris. Her skin, though dirted and scraped, was a strange shade of green, something he had never seen before in all his years of wandering the galaxy. Her features were delicate, almost fragile-looking, with silver-blue hair tangled in the debris around her head. She was barely moving, her body battered and bruised, the evidence of whatever had brought her to this point written across every inch of her skin. Alex's heart skipped a beat as he knelt beside her, reaching out to gently push aside the wreckage. His hands were careful, but his mind raced. Who was she? What was she doing here? She was an alien, that much was clear. Her eyes, though shut, were large and round, the kind of eyes that seemed to be too big for her face, too expressive for someone so young. She looked like she had been thrown away, discarded like the very pieces of technology that had been left behind in the scrapyard. But she was alive. She was breathing. That much was certain. Alex's hands shook slightly as he carefully checked her pulse. It was weak, but it was there. He couldn't just leave her here. He didn't know why, but something inside him screamed that he couldn't abandon her. He wasn't sure why he had stopped to help. It wasn't like him to involve himself in the struggles of others. But there was something about her, something that stirred a protective instinct deep within him. He couldn't walk away. He reached down and gently lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. She was light, smaller than he had expected, but her body felt fragile, as though it might break if he wasn't careful. As he carried her back through the yard, he couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her. Why had she been left here, alone and abandoned, in this place of rust and ruin? Had she been lost? Or had something done this to her? Alex carried her back to his workshop, his mind racing with questions he didn't have answers to. He wasn't a doctor, not by any means, but he knew enough about basic first aid to tend to her wounds. He didn't know how long she had been lying in the scrapyard, but he couldn't leave her to die in that state. He set her down on the cot he used for rest, quickly cleaning her up as best as he could, applying bandages to the bruises and cuts that marred her skin. She didn't wake up, not immediately, and he found himself checking her pulse more than once, just to make sure she was still alive. It felt surreal. And yet, as he looked down at the fragile creature before him, something inside him shifted. She was no longer just a stranger, no longer just another casualty in the war against time and decay. She was alive. She was here. And for some reason, Alex felt as though he had been given a second chance, a chance to care for something again. By the time the suns of Epsilon 9 began to dip below the horizon, casting the scrapyard in a cool shadow, the alien girl's breathing steadied, and she finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she just stared up at Alex, her expression blank, as if trying to process what was happening. Then, her lips parted, and she whispered a single word in a language Alex couldn't understand. It was soft, faint, as though she were testing the air around her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex leaned in closer, his heart racing, unsure of how to answer. He had no answers to give her, not yet. But as he looked down into her eyes, he realized that this was just the beginning. She wasn't just a wounded soul in need of help, she was something more. Something that would change everything. "I'm Alex," he said softly, "and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." And just like that, the girl who had once been nothing but a scrap of discarded technology, a broken part of a forgotten world, had found something new, a chance to survive, to heal, and perhaps to find something even more unexpected. And as Alex looked down at her, he knew that his life had just changed, in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The girl stirred once more, her breathing shallow but steady. Alex leaned closer, watching her closely, his fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over her skin. There was a strange pull in his chest, a gnawing need to do more for her than just give basic care. Something about her fragility, the way she looked at him, an alien teenager so far from home, alone in a galaxy that had no place for her, spoke to a deeper part of him. He had been lost once too, though in a different way, in a different place. He had always kept his distance from others. His years as a soldier had taught him how to survive alone, how to shut out the pain of connection, of camaraderie. In war, there was no room for anything but survival. The camaraderie that he had once shared with his fellow soldiers was stripped away during the wars he'd fought. But now, as he looked down at the girl, he was faced with a challenge he hadn't expected. How could he turn away from someone in need? Could he really leave her here, alone in the scrapyard, abandoned and at the mercy of a broken world? The girl's eyes flickered open again, more slowly this time, and for the first time, she looked directly at him. Her pupils were dilated, the alien green of her eyes seeming to glow faintly in the dim light of the workshop. She blinked several times, confusion clouding her features, but then, as if recognizing him as the source of her sudden change in fate, her lips parted again. "You saved me." Her voice was raspy, weak, and full of uncertainty, like someone waking from a long, nightmare-filled sleep. Alex nodded, sitting back on his heels. "Yeah, I did. You were, you were in pretty bad shape back there." She looked at her hands, still covered in dirt and blood, and then up at him, her expression one of disbelief, as if she couldn't fathom how she had gone from the wreckage of the scrapyard to this strange, unfamiliar place. "I didn't think anyone cared," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was lost." Alex took a deep breath, watching her closely. "You're not lost anymore," he said quietly. "You're safe here." She looked at him, her gaze intense, almost searching. Alex shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "My name is Alex," he said, offering a small, tentative smile, trying to ease the tension. "And you can stay here as long as you need to." She didn't immediately respond, but the look in her eyes softened slightly. A slight flicker of something Alex couldn't quite place flashed behind her gaze before she closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her once more. She drifted off to sleep again, but this time, her breathing was more even, less labored. Alex exhaled deeply, his chest tight with an unfamiliar feeling. He sat back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on her. The girl was a mystery, her origins, her species, everything about her. Alex had never seen anything like her before, and the more he thought about it, the more questions he had. Where had she come from? How had she ended up here, discarded like so much metal? And what was he supposed to do with her now? He wasn't equipped to raise a teenager, let alone one who wasn't even human. But deep down, a part of him knew the answer, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. He couldn't leave her to fend for herself. He had to help her. Somehow. Chapter 2, The Awakening. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. The girl, whom Alex had learned was named Lyra, slowly recovered under his care. It wasn't easy. She wasn't used to human food, and Alex had no way of knowing what kind of nourishment she needed. Her body, though humanoid, was distinctly alien in its composition, and he was forced to experiment with different foods to see what she could tolerate. There were moments of tension, when she would recoil at the strange textures of the food he provided, or when her eyes would fill with confusion as she tried to make sense of her new surroundings. But there were other moments too, moments of connection. Slowly, but surely, Lyra began to trust Alex, to open up just a little more each day. She was quiet, reserved, and reluctant to share much about her past, but when she did speak, it was always in a language that Alex didn't fully understand. At first, it was just a few words here and there, phrases he couldn't decipher. But then, one evening, as the sky outside darkened and the sounds of the scrapyard faded into the distance, Lyra spoke. "I wasn't always like this," she said softly, her voice low, almost reluctant, as she sat by the small window of the workshop. "I had a family, once." Alex turned his attention to her, his heart catching at the pain in her words. He had assumed as much. No one just ended up abandoned in a scrapyard like she had. They didn't just wake up in a place like this without a story. "Where are they now?" he asked gently, though he wasn't sure if he was ready for the answer. Lyra's gaze was distant, her fingers tracing patterns on the cracked surface of the table. She seemed to withdraw inward for a moment, lost in memories that she hadn't yet shared with anyone. "I don't know. I think they were gone before I even knew how to fight back." Alex remained silent, not wanting to push her, but feeling the weight of her sorrow in his chest. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like to be so far from home, abandoned in a place where nothing and no one mattered. It was clear she had been through a lot. Her body was still recovering from the wounds she had suffered, but the emotional scars were far deeper. He could see that now. He just didn't know how to help her. "I was raised in the colony," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "My people, we were engineers. We built things. Big things. The biggest ships, the most powerful weapons. But we were just tools, really. Tools for the people who controlled everything. And when they decided we were no longer useful, they threw us away." Alex's heart tightened as he heard the bitterness in her words. It was a familiar story, one that had played out across the galaxy in 1,000 different ways. People used, abused, and discarded until they were no longer valuable. The same fate had awaited many who had fought in the wars he had been part of. The same fate that had driven him away from everything he knew. "Why didn't you fight?" he asked, his voice soft but curious. She turned to him then, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though the question itself stung. "I did fight," she said quietly. "I fought every day. But you can't win when you're up against an empire. And when you're nothing more than a cog in the machine." She trailed off, her eyes clouded with the weight of those unspoken words. Alex didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure what kind of advice he could give her. He had never been a hero, never been the one to lead others into battle. He had just done his job, fixed things, and tried to stay out of the way. He had been the cog in the machine, just like her. But now, with her in his care, he felt a strange sense of responsibility. Maybe we can find another way, Alex said, trying to sound optimistic. Maybe we don't have to fight the same way anymore. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. And how do you suppose we do that? Alex smiled softly, a genuine smile that wasn't born of pity but of something else. Something akin to hope. I don't know yet, he said. But I think we can figure it out. Together. For the first time in days, Lyra's lips parted into a small, tentative smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The two of them sat there, side by side. As the evening deepened, the stars outside their small window shining bright against the darkness of the scrapyard. And in that quiet, unspoken moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't love, not yet, not in the way that most people think of love. It was something deeper, something more fragile. It was a connection born from survival, from shared loss, from understanding each other's pain. And though neither of them knew what the future held, they knew this. They weren't alone anymore. Days passed, and with each one, the space between Alex and Lyra grew less strained. She was still a mystery to him, her history, her true origins, her purpose, everything about her was still an enigma. But she was more than just a survivor now. She was beginning to show signs of a personality that was hidden beneath the surface of her trauma. She was quiet, thoughtful, and often lost in her own thoughts. But there was also a curiosity to her that Alex had noticed. It was as if, for the first time, she was seeing the world with new eyes. It wasn't easy. Her healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional and psychological. There were moments when she would withdraw into herself, her mind flashing back to memories Alex couldn't even begin to understand. Sometimes, she would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her body trembling as she relived whatever nightmares haunted her. But each time, Alex was there. He didn't know what to do, but he stayed close, offering whatever comfort he could. The world outside the workshop remained unforgiving. The scrapyard was a bleak, cold place, and its inhabitants, the scavengers, the smugglers, the lost souls, were not the kind of people Alex was eager to get involved with. But Lyra was different. She had something within her, something that made her more than the circumstances she had been thrust into. Every day, Alex would take her out to explore the scrapyard, showing her how to scavenge safely, how to find useful parts, and how to survive in a world where everything seemed to be in a constant state of decay. Lyra wasn't an expert, but her keen mind and adaptability made her a quick learner. Together, they sorted through the junk, piecing together the remnants of the galaxy's past to create new tools, new inventions. It wasn't much, but it gave her something to focus on, a new purpose to replace the one that had been stolen from her. One afternoon, as they worked in the small workshop, Lyra's voice broke through the silence, her tone hesitant. I don't understand, she said, looking up from the pile of metal she had been sorting through. Why are you helping me? Alex paused, his hands stilling for a moment before he turned to face her. He had been expecting the question. She had asked it in various forms over the past week, but this time, her eyes held a deeper sense of confusion, a longing for something that she wasn't sure she deserved. I'm helping you because you deserve it, Alex said, his voice steady but soft. You're not just some piece of junk to be discarded. You're a person. You have worth. And I'm not going to let you forget that. Lyra's eyes flickered with something, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. She swallowed hard, as if the weight of his words were too much for her to process. I don't know what to do with that, she whispered. Alex shrugged. You don't have to know right now. Just take it one step at a time. For the first time in days, Lyra smiled, small, tentative, but real. She looked down at the scrap metal in her hands, her fingers tracing the edges of the pieces. Alex watched her, feeling a strange sense of pride. She was healing. Slowly, but surely, she was healing. The days blended together, quiet, uneventful, but also filled with the subtle growth that only time could bring. The harsh, jagged edges of Lyra's past were still there, lurking in the shadows, but she was learning to adapt. Alex didn't know where this would all lead, or if she would ever fully recover from the trauma that had shaped her life. But he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her. He wouldn't. Chapter 3. A growing bond. As the weeks went by, something unexpected began to grow between Alex and Lyra, a bond that neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't the kind of connection Alex had ever planned for, especially not with someone who wasn't even human, someone who had been a victim of forces he could hardly comprehend. But in the time they had spent together, something shifted. They had become more than just a soldier and a lost alien team. They had become companions. They spent more time together in the workshop, working on small projects, sharing their thoughts, and simply being. Alex found himself looking forward to their conversations, though they were rarely about anything important. They would talk about the small things, the way the stars looked at night from the window, the sound of the scrapyard at dawn, the endless possibilities that lay beyond the broken walls of their home. But it wasn't just the small moments that began to bind them together. It was the way Lyra had started to change. She no longer seemed like a shell of the person she had once been. She was curious about the world again. She laughed when Alex made a joke, even if it was a bad one. She asked questions, challenging him to think about the world in ways he hadn't in years. She was no longer the broken, quiet girl she had been when he first found her. She was becoming someone new, someone who had a future, someone who could stand beside him, not as a ward or a victim, but as an equal. One evening, as they sat together on the roof of the workshop, the stars above them sparkling in the inky sky, Lyra spoke again, her voice softer than usual. Alex, I don't know how to say this, but I feel different now. I didn't think I could feel anything anymore. But being here with you, I don't feel like I'm lost anymore. I feel like I can find my place again. Alex turned to look at her, his heart stirring at the vulnerability in her voice. He had never expected this. He had never expected to become so involved in someone's life again, to care so deeply about another person. He had come to Epsilon 9 to escape everything, to hide away from the war, from the pain, from the connections that always seemed to break him. But now, with Lyra by his side, he realized that maybe this was what he needed all along, a second chance, not just for her, but for himself. I'm glad you feel that way, Alex said, his voice quiet but sincere. Because I feel the same. You've helped me more than you know, Lyra. I didn't realize how much I needed someone else until you showed up. Lyra's eyes softened, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. She reached out, her hand brushing against his, the touch light and tentative, but full of unspoken meaning. Alex's heart raced in his chest, and for a split second, he forgot where they were, forgot the scrapyard, the rust, the broken past that had led them both to this point. He realized, in that moment, that things had changed. They were no longer two lost souls drifting through the galaxy. They had found something in each other, something that neither of them had expected. And then, as if she had read his mind, Lyra looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex, I don't know what this is, but I think I might be falling for you. The words hung in the air between them, charged with something neither of them had planned for. Alex's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. He had never allowed himself to get close to anyone before, had never imagined that he would ever be capable of something like this. But as he looked at Lyra, sitting beside him, her gaze steady, her presence calming, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth fighting for after all. I don't know what to say either, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. But I think I'm falling for you too. The silence that followed was filled with the unspoken understanding that something had shifted between them. It wasn't just the pain or the scars of their past that defined them now. It was the connection they had forged together, something deeper than either of them had ever expected. And though neither of them had any idea what the future would hold, for the first time in a long time, they were no longer afraid to find out together. The days following that evening on the roof were quieter, but there was a noticeable shift in the way Alex and Lyra interacted. It was subtle at first, small smiles exchanged when their eyes met, a quiet understanding in the way they moved together in the workshop. The awkwardness between them melted away, replaced by something deeper, more comfortable. They were no longer just a man and an alien girl in a scrapyard. They were two people sharing their lives in a world that had long since forgotten what it meant to care for one another. Alex found himself thinking about her constantly. He had always been the loner, the soldier who kept his distance from others, the one who shut down every time anyone tried to get close. But Lyra had changed that. Her presence in his life was both a challenge and a comfort. She pushed him to open up in ways he had never thought possible. She wanted to know everything about him, from the smallest details about his past to his dreams for the future, even though he didn't have many of those. For the first time in years, Alex found himself talking about things he had buried deep inside. His past in the military, the people he had lost, and the reasons he had turned his back on everything. He hadn't realized how much he had needed to share those stories until Lyra had asked, and suddenly, the weight of it all didn't seem as heavy. For her part, Lyra was starting to heal too, though in her own way. She had started helping Alex in the workshop more, using her strange alien abilities to manipulate metal and machinery in ways that surprised him. She was talented more so than he had initially realized. The things they built together began to take on a life of their own. What had once been a makeshift refuge was now a functional, thriving space, a small corner of the world where they could create and repair, where they could forget the world outside and simply exist. Lyra found herself laughing more, even making jokes, though they were often tinged with a kind of quiet, bittersweet humor. Alex was still amazed at the resilience she had, how she could push past the horrors of her past and still find moments of joy in the little things. But despite the growing connection between them, Alex knew there were still questions unanswered. He couldn't ignore the fact that Lyra was not human, that she came from a place he couldn't understand. She was an alien no matter how much she seemed to fit into his life. There were still parts of her that were so far beyond his comprehension. He had come to care for her in ways he hadn't expected, but he was still afraid. Afraid that one day, she would remember who she truly was, where she truly came from, and that it would tear them apart. One evening, after another long day of working in the workshop, Alex found himself sitting beside Lyra at the small table, the two of them eating what little food they had left. The scrapyard outside was eerily quiet, the shadows of the broken ships stretching long across the ground as the twin moons rose in the sky. Lyra had been quieter than usual, her fingers absent-mindedly playing with the edge of her plate. "Lyra, Alex started, but he hesitated. He had to ask, he knew he had to. The question had been sitting at the back of his mind for days. Where did you come from? Who are you really? Her eyes met his, and for the first time in a long time, there was no smile on her face. Her expression was unreadable, her gaze intense as though she were weighing whether to share this part of herself with him. She took a deep breath, pushing the plate aside, and folded her hands in her lap. "I come from a planet called Sadra," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "It was once a peaceful place. We were engineers, builders, creators. My people built ships, designed technology. We were known for our knowledge, our skills. But that was before the war." Alex listened intently, his heart heavy as he realized she was finally opening up, finally letting him see the full extent of the world she had come from. When the war came, everything changed. The factions fighting for control took everything: our homes, our families, our land. We were scattered, forced into hiding, abandoned by those who had promised to protect us. My people, they were used, turned into weapons. I was one of them. Her voice wavered for a brief moment, but she quickly regained her composure. I was part of a colony, raised to be a soldier. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't fight, couldn't become what they wanted me to be. So, they threw me away, left me here, on Epsilon 9. Alex's chest tightened as the weight of her words settled over him. She had been discarded like a tool, like something broken, something no longer needed. He felt a surge of anger at those who had treated her so callously, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never knew." Lyra shook her head, her eyes distant. "It's not your fault. I don't expect anyone to understand. But this place, this scrapyard, it's all I've known for so long. I never thought I'd find this. I never thought I'd find someone who would care enough to help me." Alex reached across the table, placing his hand over hers gently. "You don't have to be alone anymore. You have a place here with me." Her eyes met his again, and in that moment, something passed between them, a connection that went beyond words. Lyra's past, her pain, her alien origins, they didn't matter in the same way anymore. What mattered was the bond they had forged, the life they were building together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to bridge the gaps between their worlds. Chapter 4. The Unexpected Truth. Weeks turned into months, And as the seasons shifted on Epsilon 9, so did the relationship between Alex and Lyra. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust, about growth. Lyra had become more than just a survivor to him. She had become his partner, his equal. They shared everything, their dreams, their fears, their goals for the future. They worked side by side in the workshop, creating, repairing, and dreaming of a life beyond the scrapyard. But as much as Alex had come to care for her, there was always a lingering question, a doubt in the back of his mind. Lyra's alien origins were always there, a reminder that no matter how much they had in common, they would never truly be the same. He had wondered, countless times, what would happen if she remembered who she truly was, where she truly came from. Would she still want to stay with him? Or would she leave, returning to her people, her true home? It was a question Alex couldn't escape, no matter how much he tried to bury it. And as the days passed, Lyra seemed to sense his unease. She had grown more confident, more herself, but there were still moments of uncertainty, of confusion about her past, about what she was meant to do. And one day, as they worked together in the workshop, it happened. "I need to go back," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Alex's heart skipped a beat. He turned to her, his eyes wide with shock. "What do you mean? Go back where?" "To Tsadra," she replied, her voice calm, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I need to know if any of my people are still alive. I need to find out if there's anything left of my home." Alex stared at her, a cold chill creeping up his spine. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't been ready. He hadn't prepared himself for this reality. "Lyra, you don't have to go back. You're safe here with me. We can stay here, together." She shook her head. "I can't run away forever. I have to know the truth, Alex. And I need to know if there's a future for me outside of this scrapyard." Alex's chest tightened, but he knew what she was saying. He understood it, even if it hurt. "I'll help you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll go with you. We'll find your people, Lyra. We'll figure it out together." She looked at him, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You don't have to, you know. I'm not asking you to follow me. But I'd like you to." "I'm not letting you go alone," he said firmly. And so, they set out together, leaving the scrapyard behind, heading toward the unknown. It wasn't the end of their journey. It was just another chapter. They didn't know what awaited them on Tsadra, or if there was any hope left for her people, but Alex knew one thing. Wherever the road took them, they would face it together.